An Irrational Hatred of Luton, a West Ham fan's story by Robert Banks. Forward by Tony Cottee. Chapter 38. China in Your Hands. West Ham United 2, Southampton 1, 5th of December 1987. I'm not exactly sure when I realised I had a real problem. I knew my nose wasn't behaving as it should do, and that weird and wonderful things were going on in my sinuses that primarily resulted in occasional headaches and colds that went on forever. It was as though there was something stuffed up there that simply refused to budge, a pen top or a Smartie, something of that sort of size. It only bothered me occasionally, and I never worried about it, particularly as I'd gone almost a year without any problems. One Sunday, I was harmlessly watching a game on the TV, Liverpool against Sheffield Wednesday, when I sneezed. And that's when it all came out, literally. This was scary. A bogey the size and shape of a big biro came out of my right nostril, but remained attached firmly to the inside of my nose. This was no ordinary bogey. This was super bogey, bogey plus, with a life all of its own. Now what did I do? Should I give it a quick yank and have done with it? No, that would hurt far too much. Should I trim it off and go down to hospital next morning? No, this thing had blood vessels in it. What if I bled to death? There was only one option. Have a good sniff and send it back up from whence it came. Surprisingly, I couldn't feel it once it had disappeared, but I was obviously cautious and avoided blowing my nose. Aware of the fact that I had something of alien proportions up my hooter, the doctor examined me the next day. He said I'd twisted the cartilage that separated my nostrils, and that had caused polyps to form in my sinuses. That was what was giving me headaches. That was my biro-shaped bogey. Chances were there was one on the other side as well, and I would probably need surgery, as they were so well advanced they couldn't be removed under a local anaesthetic, and anyway the cartilage would have to come out, which would mean going under the knife. The specialist had a look and agreed. It was reasonably urgent. He'd get me a place in hospital as soon as possible and do both operations at the same time. He asked if I'd received a blow to the face at any time that might have caused the cartilage to twist like a piece of pasta. As he asked me, I couldn't think, but a few days later it all came flooding back and slotted into place. God, I hate Chelsea. I thought of asking the surgeon to keep the polyps for me so that I could send them to Ken Bates, but decided against it. He probably receives mail like that every day. I was given a date in early December and tried not to think about it. After the Barnsley debacle, we drew against Charlton at Upton Park, and it could almost be classified as a good result. Almost, but not quite. We threw away the lead once again, Paul Ince scoring and Garth Crooks equalising. I listened to the game on and off through the afternoon on club call. Each time I dialed, I urged the message to have changed for the better, but it didn't. The best result of the month was the hurricane which swept across the south of England, flattening everything in sight, and a few things out of sight too. Overnight, Sevenoaks in Kent became One Oak. All the trees in my road fell over, some crushing cars underneath. The best thing to arise out of this was the fact that there were no trains running for the rest of the day, and all the roads were blocked, so I couldn't go to college even though I desperately wanted to. I phoned in to see if I was missing anything, but they said college would be closed, a free day off. The office was subsequently very busy with complaints the following Saturday, as all the tenants in our managed properties phoned in asking whether they were going to get a new roof or not. I'm not usually one for passing the buck, but unashamedly admit to referring all calls to the relevant department, whilst intermittently urging the club call message to remain the same. A 2-1 win at Oxford provided a much-needed confidence boost, together with a bit of credibility. OK, Oxford were to go on to be relegated, but we weren't to know that, were we? A Cottee strike, together with an own goal, gave us victory. Black Monday followed. No one knew it, but it was the start of the Great Depression. I wondered if I would ever live to see Purple Tuesday or Tangerine Friday. Why was everything always black? I managed another game the following Sunday, Avocado Sunday, when the live cameras were at Upton Park yet again for the visit of Manchester United. Liverpool were running away with the title. Manchester United lagged behind in 5th place, but were still favourites to beat us, a situation we always seemed to prefer. Colin Gibson put United 1-0 up just before half-time, and everything seemed to be going to plan. I stood on my own behind the North Bank goal. Close and Staintooth had travelled up with me, but had season tickets for the East Terrace, so we parted at the gates. I wasn't sure whether I was jealous of them or not. Judging by what I'd seen of West Ham so far that season, I was better off at my desk or in the car. That didn't stop me wanting to be there, but my bank manager felt better about it. We enjoyed a little purple, or was it amethyst, patch in the second half, and we got an equaliser when Mark Wald was tripped in the box and Ray Stewart scored his second goal of the season. A few minutes later, Cotty raced through, but his shot was about an inch wide of the post. There was a bloke standing to my left with his girlfriend. She complained constantly throughout the game about having a headache, being thirsty, hungry, hot, cold, tired, bored, squashed, you name it. At first I thought, what a miserable cow. But later I realised that she was probably none of the things she was complaining about. Her complaints were systematic reaction to the fact that she simply didn't want to be there. I couldn't accept that anyone would not want to be on the North Bank at Upton Park when there was a game on, but each to his or her own, I suppose. I made a silent vow never to drag anyone along to a football match, be they male or female, who really didn't want to go. We missed Frankie Mack. At the end of September, while everyone was speculating about Tony Cotty's future, Lyle sneakily sold McAvenny to Celtic for £750,000. Not a bad return on the $350,000 invested in 1985, but he had a job to do at West Ham. He wouldn't be any use to us in Scotland. We mourned his departure as deeply as the loss of a close and loving relative. For the time being, though, the side had reasonable form, and we were in fact unbeaten in the league following Frank's departure. After the draw with United, we won at Watford, another side destined for relegation, Cotty and Alan Dickens scoring in a 2-1 win. From the relegation zone, we'd hauled ourselves up to 14th place and appeared reasonably comfortable. Then came two setbacks. Sheffield Wednesday were even worse than us and had no right to beat us at Upton Park, but they did, 1-0. If you thought watching a game live was a frustrating experience, try not watching it, it's 10 times worse. I then got to my third game of the season, a Simod Cup game against Millwall at Upton Park. The Simod Cup was the new name for the full Members' Cup. Still no one took it seriously, but it was a game against Millwall, and just like friendlies against Tottenham, everyone takes them seriously. Eamon Dolan made his full debut in place of Tony Cotty, John Lyall deciding that Cotty needed a rest. Dickens put us 1-0 up, and it didn't seem to matter, but we threw it away again, Sheringham and Cascarino scoring and turning the match in Millwall's favour. Two things remain prominent in my mind about this game. First, there was a crowd of only 11,337 in the ground that night, and yet for each fan there were two policemen. Helicopters buzzed overhead and meat wagons waited in anticipation of arrests outside the ground. The bill for policing the game must have been 3 times the gate receipts. Why did we bother? Secondly, a run from inside his own half by Paul Hilton, which earned him the somewhat sarcastic nickname Diego. He ran fully 60 yards, the ball stuck firmly to his foot, sending defenders tumbling to the ground with his subtle body swerves. As he reached the edge of the area, the keeper nipped the ball off his toe. What a wet lettuce. Hilton did manage to find the net in the next game against Everton at Goodison Park, but we were 3-0 down at the time and it was a futile gesture. As often happens, from time to time, something happened outside the football arena which put everything in perspective. I might have been very upset about the way West Ham were playing and under pressure to finish my construction technology coursework, but at least I wasn't at King's Cross Tube Station the night 31 people died in a nightmare inferno. I sat at my drawing board in my bedroom, trying to draw a cross-section through a cavity wall, as the news broke on the radio. As each half hour passed, the death toll rose steadily, and I thought about Becky and Julia at college. They would have had to go through King's Cross. It was late, sure, but they should both be home by now. But what if they'd stopped off for a drink on the way home? I was very pleased to see them present and correct the next day. Only a week beforehand, one of our number had been stabbed at Vauxhall Cross by a nutter with a penknife. She was lucky, receiving only flesh wounds, but we were all a bit edgy after that. I knew for a fact that you didn't have to be on the street for that sort of thing to happen. When I was at Vauxhall College, someone was stabbed in the refectory. Not a pretty sight, I can tell you. The last place I'd want to be stabbed is in the refectory. After King's Cross, the only time I get uptight about someone smoking where they shouldn't is in a tube station. I know I wasn't there. I didn't know anyone who was there, but just like Bradford, I could so easily have been there. It was time to take stock and be grateful for small mercies, like Tony Cottee. Cottee scored twice in the next home game, a 3-2 win over Nottingham Forest. I'd only heard how good his second goal was. I didn't get to see it until the season's highlights video came out, and I couldn't believe it. A cross came over from the right, attacking the South Bank end, and Cottee just launched his feet at it, almost parallel to the ground when he hit it on the volley, and it went straight into the top of the net. Bobby Robson watched from the stands and still failed to be impressed. What did you have to do to impress this man, apart from to have played for Ipswich, of course? Our divine right to 3 points at Coventry came to a grinding halt with a 0-0 draw, and the evil hour approached when I faced the surgeon's knife. I had to go in on the Sunday, have the operation on the Monday, and all being well, I'd be let out on the Tuesday. That being the case, I took the Saturday off work to prepare by going to Upton Park to watch the game against Southampton. Keane scored a belter before the defence pressed the anticipated self-destruct button and allowed Danny Wallace in to equalise. Alan Dickens scored the winner in the second half. I had the merest hint of a cold coming, but I knew if I said anything they wouldn't let me have the operation. I wanted it dealt with and out of the way. You can imagine how I felt having all that gunge and goo in my head. I wanted it out. I had to take the last week of term off college, which was unfortunate because I missed much of the Christmas boozing, but I got a nice card from everyone in my seminar group. I was quite choked. Dad took me to the hospital on the Sunday. The irresistible Liverpool were on TV playing Chelsea, who actually had the audacity to take a 1-0 lead and looked as though they might nick it. Realising that Chelsea were directly responsible for me being in the state I was in, I encouraged Liverpool to knock the wind out of Chelsea's sails, which they did 2-1. The operation was a complete success. As I woke up post-op, the guy in the next bed was having a reaction to the anaesthetic and was doing his nut. I just wanted a drink. My mouth was as dry as an Arabian pub. I asked for a drink, but the Gestapo staff nurse refused. She swabbed my mouth with damp cotton wool, but that was like offering a starving man a chicken McNugget. I was told I wouldn't be able to drink for 7 hours. That wouldn't have been so bad if I'd been able to sleep, but I had a bed that was as comfortable and cosy as a field of stinging nettles, and the guy in the next bed kept shouting death threats at everyone. To add insult to injury, the children's ward was at the end of our ward, and the little Joeys just kept on crying. Also, my dressing consisted of 2 sticks of cotton wool, one up each nostril, the size and shape of an average weightlifter's thumb. I had to breathe through my parched mouth and was in no condition to die, let alone sleep. Mum and Dad came in to see me. Dad helpfully waved an ice-cold can of fizzy Ribena in my face. I could have throttled him. As soon as I was allowed to drink, I perked up. I was allowed to get up and walk about, and the next day, after watching the varsity rugby match on the TV, I was allowed home. Oh, and one more thing, the ward sister said as I was leaving. No undue excitement, and no alcohol for a month. Great. Christmas just around the corner, and I incur an alcohol ban. Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you so very much. Chapter 39. Happy New Year. Norwich City 4, West Ham United 1. 1st of January 1988. Now that I did have some time to myself, I still couldn't go to football for fear of bleeding all over everybody. It would have been no fun for anyone. I had to sit and listen from my sick bed as we drew 1-1 at Chelsea, throwing away a 1-0 lead once again, and apparently playing Chelsea off the pitch. That was some consolation for my condition, but not much. The following Saturday, we beat Newcastle, including Paul Gascoigne and Mirandinha, 2-1 at Upton Park. Paul Ince scoring a goal of truly classic proportions, a dipping shot from outside the area. By the time Boxing Day came, I'd already ignored the doctor's advice and had a drink or 12 over Christmas, and hadn't keeled over and died, so I saw no reason why I shouldn't break the other rule and get a little bit excited at Upton Park. I went along to watch the home game against Wimbledon, but my doctor needn't have worried, as I hardly got excited at all, seeing us go down 2-0 in the first half, only pulling one back through a race-Stewart penalty in the second. I was keen to get back to work as soon as possible and not dwell on my operation. I was quite candid and open with people when they asked me why I'd been in hospital. I didn't want people to think I'd gone in for circumcision or vasectomy or anything like that. By the time I'd given them a full description of the operation and described exactly what came out, they wished they hadn't asked. I had to miss our 2-1 defeat at White Hart Lane as I was working, but had New Year's Day free and arranged to take Beanhead to Carrow Road for the game against Norwich. It was another one of those days when it never stopped raining, right from the time I left the front door to the time I got back. A miserable journey to Norwich in appalling conditions, a soaking walk from the car park to the ground, hopes raised briefly when Cotty gave us the lead in the first half, only to be dashed when Norwich took to the field for the second half and ripped us apart. Norwich were the only other First Division side to wear the unfashionable scoreline kit, but it didn't seem to affect them in the way it affected us. Theirs looked even worse than ours because they had to wear green and yellow, difficult colours for anyone to look good in. Having said that, Norwich were below us in the league, but the following season, wearing exactly the same horrible kit, challenged for the title. Sad. New Year's Day was on a Friday. The next match was played the next day, the Saturday. I wasn't too upset about missing the game against Luton Town, purely because, as you may have gathered by now, I'm not exactly fond of Luton. Another lead squandered, Ince getting the ball across the line but hardly in the back of the net on the hour. I rang club call from the office just as this was happening, but I knew that because it was Luton we wouldn't hang on. I suppose I should have been grateful it was only 1-1. My brain had told me it would probably be 3-1 at the least. It was around this time I met Jo. Jo was the proverbial friend of a friend who came along to one of our Thursday night drink-ups at my local pub, the Clock House in Beckenham. She was bright and lively, with long flowing brown hair, the most fantastic pair of you could wish for. Talk about hard to get, though. It took me several weeks of phone calls and gentle persuasion to get her to come out with me. When we eventually did go out, we went for a Chinese meal and found we got on like a house on fire. She'd mentioned she had trouble with her back as the result of an accident as a young girl when she fell off a horse. This meant she still had to go to hospital occasionally to have physio. That's nothing, I told her. Next Wednesday I've got to go and have all the scabs pulled out of my nose. I think I put her off her lychees. She was fascinated by my interest in football and wanted to come along to a game with me. I thought about the bloke at the Manchester United game with his whinging girlfriend and about Jo's back, and thought that if she wanted to come I would have to buy a seat, or preferably two. Trouble was, I wasn't available to go for the foreseeable future. I was delighted that she took an interest though, and didn't view my obsession as an intrusion on our relationship. Not that we really had one. Not until I phoned her and her mother answered the phone and told me she was in hospital. She gave me the address and the ward, and she said she'd be sure she'd appreciate a visit. They say a gallstone provides the most pain a human can endure without passing out. Whoever discovered that obviously never had half a dozen scabs pulled out of their nose with long metal pliers by a junior doctor with dirty fingernails. I shudder even now at the very thought. I told Karen at college about my situation with Jo. She offered me sisterly advice, what I should take, what I should say, what I should wear, etc. I wasn't sure how much notice to take of a woman who openly stated she took no notice of romantic advances from men and was more interested in what was on the inside than outward superficial shows of affection. Karen was too complicated an issue for me. I listened to the problems she was having with her boyfriend Dave, but could offer no advice to her. After all, she knew everything. I went to see Jo at the hospital and was shown to her room by the nurse. When I got in, it was clear she'd been crying. I sat on the bed and hugged her and realised I could do with some more. She'd been told her back was going to cause her problems for the rest of her life, and she should accept the fact. What can you say to someone who's been told that? It would be like being told there's no cure for being a West Ham fan. I just told her to get better and enjoy the grapes. If she behaved, I promised I would take her to a game before the end of the season. Now, if that didn't speed up her recovery, I'm sorry, I don't know what would. The team turned their attention to the FA Cup. Charlton were the third round opponents for the second time in 3 years, this time at Upton Park, and goals from Brady and Cottee saw them off 2-0. In 1988, the draw for the FA Cup still took place on the Monday after all the games had been played. At around lunchtime, I was at college that Monday, riding in the lift down to the library for a bit of reading in between lectures. Yes, I was. As the door opened, who should be there but Brian the Luton fan? He had a grin on his face the length of the M4 and a transistor radio welded to his ear. Well, I asked, what's so bleeding funny? QPR away, he laughed. Plastic pitch, oh well, maybe next year. See you, Rob. I wasn't too disheartened. Despite our much publicised hatred of plastic pitches, the one at Loftus Road appeared to be causing the home team as much grief as the visitors, and in the summer that followed they relented to the pressure and ripped it up, replacing it with natural grass surface. In addition, we'd won on our previous 2 visits to Loftus Road, and we had a chance for a bit of practice as we were due to play there in the league just 14 days before the cup meeting. Hopes were raised further when we won the league game. Alan Dickens headed the winner in a 1-0 victory. Maybe Brian the Luton fan was being a bit presumptuous. Maybe he wasn't. In a now infamous game, a crowd of 23,651, a huge crowd for QPR, spilled out onto the pitch, causing considerable delays, over an hour in a goalless first half. So the match was still in progress when I arrived home from work at 5:30 p.m. David Pesanti, an Israeli international, gave QPR the lead, but Cottee equalised a couple of minutes later. Gary Bannister got a second and a certain Martin Allen the third. Desperation set in as Lyle threw Paul Hilton up front. Surely things weren't that bad. It was very disappointing to go out at the 4th round stage, as we'd made at least the 5th round in each of the previous 4 seasons. It also meant there would be no postponements for me to look forward to seeing on midweek dates later in the season. The propaganda had begun. No panic buying was the most frequently used phrase at Upton Park since the departure of Frank McAvenny. It was clear we needed another striker, but all the good ones were too expensive or unavailable, and none of the crap ones which we could afford wanted to come and play for us. You could hardly blame them, could you? When we played Liverpool at Anfield on February the 6th, they were still unbeaten and 13 points ahead of nearest rivals Nottingham Forest. It was built up to be the biggest slaughter on Merseyside since the 6-0 thrashing they handed us in 1984. I deliberately avoided phoning club call or listening to the radio at work because I didn't want to depress myself. When I left the office at 5 o'clock, I switched on the car radio for the classified check. When I heard the result, Liverpool 0, West Ham 0, I was so delighted I reversed the car straight into a lamppost. Chapter 40. Don't Turn Around. West Ham United 0, Everton 0, 4th of April 1988. Of the 45 League and Cup matches played by West Ham United in 1987-88, no fewer than 35 were played on Saturdays. Early exits from both cup competitions meant that the number of midweek games available for me to watch were restricted. No league matches were scheduled for midweek, and we only played Arsenal and Nottingham Forest midweek because of their involvement in the cup, not ours. The other midweek fixtures were played on public holidays over Christmas, New Year and Easter. Of the games available to me, I attended all with the exception of the midweek trip to Nottingham Forest and the cup tie at Barnsley, which of course I would have got to had it not been for Mrs. Lister's Yorkshire pudding. I therefore had no reason to feel ashamed of my lack of attendance, particularly as I'd done every game of the previous season, while Barney, Natty Matty and Beanhead made feeble excuses. Home draws against Portsmouth and Oxford were Saturday games, therefore missed. On paper they were games we should have won, but then on paper we were top of the league. Away defeats at Derby 1-0 and Charlton 3-0 were also on Saturdays, a fact for which I remain eternally grateful. The striker we'd been promised finally arrived, on the day that the fumble I'd been promised by Joe also arrived. Leroy Rossignol was signed from Fulham and was thought by many to be the burly, hustling foil for Tony Cottee we'd been crying out for. The signs were good. The day after he put pen to paper, he scored the winner on his home debut against Watford. He continued in similar vein at Old Trafford, scoring an equaliser only for United to run out 3-1 winners. And again on Easter Saturday in a 2-1 defeat at Hillsborough. If Rosinia and Cotti could only manage to get one each in a game, we could start winning. Goals had been the problem. When we faced Everton on Easter Monday, we'd scored only 33 goals. Liverpool had got that many in their away games alone, and both Oxford and Chelsea, who were to be relegated, had scored more than we had. We needed to find a combination that clicked. As 0-0 draws go, the one against Everton wasn't bad. Cotti and Rosinia linked up well and caused them a few headaches. Everton were reigning champions, but had hit their peak and were about to start the slippery slide back to mediocrity. Their slide took a lot longer than ours. Tony Gale made his 400th league appearance, and West Ham should have won. There you have it, the game in a nutshell. I knew Jo wanted me. All she had to do was say the word. Trouble was, she never said the word. 2 days after I'd worked out a route into her drawers, she dumped me. I didn't have time to be upset about it because I was too busy working towards my first year exams at Poly, and I was determined that wasn't going to be spoilt by a woman. Just when we thought we had it sorted, with Cotti and Rosinia up front, Arsenal beat us at Upton Park. That hurt more than Jo telling me to sling my hook. It was the only midweek match we'd played at Upton Park, so I was pleased to be able to go, and the feeling of depression after the defeat was truly unbearable. Tony Cotti had just hit the post with an opportunist shot when Michael Thomas raced up the other end and scored. I almost cried. The team was right in the middle of nowhere. The management called it a period of transition. I called it a period of not really knowing what was going on. Another new signing had arrived, a young fullback from Birmingham City called Julian Dix. Julian Dix? What the hell was going on? What were we doing signing players with names like Julian? We needed rough, tough guys out there with skill to go with it. How wrong I was. First time I saw Julian Dix play was in the goalless draw against Everton, and I fell instantly and irreversibly in love with him. He was a man with skill and commitment in equal measure. Above all else, he was a bit of a character. Not obvious at first, but over the years he would become the spirit of West Ham United. Whilst we appeared to be several places above the relegation scrap, there weren't that many points in it, and there was still a very real possibility of getting sucked in. After a goalless draw at Nottingham Forest, we were only 2 points ahead of Charlton, who occupied the playoff spot, and 4 ahead of Portsmouth, who were in the third automatic relegation place. Another point in the home match against Coventry helped, but we needed wins to make sure of avoiding trouble. A point at Southampton would have helped even more, but in a season symbolised by the surrendering of advantages, we went 1-0 up, only to lose 2-1, and found ourselves up to our necks in cack. Charlton had won, which left them in the playoff spot on goal difference only. When Chelsea came to Upton Park on May Day bank holiday, they were 1 point ahead of us. By the time we'd finished with them, they were 2 points behind us, and a victory for Charlton left Chelsea saddled with the playoff place. I rubbed my nose and chuckled heartily. We slaughtered Chelsea. Leroy got 2 before half-time, and the game was effectively over. Paul Hilton got another from close range, before Chelsea pulled one back, but Tony Cotti scored his last goal for West Ham before his transfer to Everton to make it 4-1. It was the first and only time we'd scored 4 in one game during 87-88. If we could have picked a time to do it, that was the best moment. Other results meant we were safe, only capable of being dragged back into trouble if we lost our last game by 13 goals or more against Newcastle at St James's Park on the final Saturday of the season. Being West Ham, this was a distinct possibility, so John Lyall took the unprecedented precaution of naming a goalkeeper as substitute. Phil Parkes wore the number 12 shirt, and as if to represent the season in one whole match, West Ham went ahead through Stuart Robson, only to lose 2-1. It was a fitting end to a crap season, which was difficult to look back on with any sense of achievement. Merely staying up was hardly an achievement when one considered we'd been challenging seriously for trophies in the previous 2 seasons, but the warning signs had been there as recently as late 1986. The downward spiral is the most difficult to break. The highlight of 87-88 was the 4-1 win over Chelsea, which contributed enormously to their relegation. They lost in the playoffs to Middlesbrough. The only other high points were the signings of Rosinia and Dix, and without a shadow of a doubt, the contents of Joe's bra. On the footballing front, at least, I felt sure that 88-89 could only get better. Wrong again. Chapter 41. The Only Way is Up. West Ham United 1, Charlton Athletic 3, 3rd of September 1988. For the second year running, the unfancied underdogs won in the cup final. This time, Wimbledon, not just unfancied but totally rejected as no-hopers, beat a Liverpool side who had swept all before them in winning the title at a canter. Surely Liverpool would win their second double in 3 seasons. The funny old game reared its ugly head again. Rob Fox, a new pal of mine who was a regular at my local but had a nasty tendency to support Spurs, brought some cans round and we thoroughly enjoyed the game. Liverpool had a goal disallowed and a penalty saved. Wimbledon casually strolled up the other end and Laurie Sanchez headed a Dennis Wise cross past Grobbelaar. Seeing Dave Besant lift the cup was unbelievable and gave us all hope. Foxy came round again later in the summer to watch England against Holland in the European Championships. England had already lost to Ireland, lost to Holland and a few days later lost to Russia. Less said about that the better. Bobby Robson refused to learn the vital factor for success of the England team. You must have at least 3 West Ham players in the side. Pre-season optimism is a wonderful thing. I sat in the Wimpy Bar in Beckenham High Street with Julie, a good friend, discussing nothing in particular, when I noticed the back page of a fellow diner's copy of The Sun that West Ham had signed David Kelly from Walsall for £600,000. I'd heard good things about Kelly, and at the time was quite pleased about the deal. We'd finally sold Tony Cottee, stinging Everton for £2.2 million on the way. I was very sad to see Tony go, strangely not as sad as I'd been when Frankie left. That was when the partnership was broken. When Cottee left, it was something that had been expected for some time. I felt better when I heard we'd signed Kelly. In addition, we had bought a new goalkeeper, a priority in my view, as both Tom McAllister and Phil Parkes were both past their sell-by dates, and I'm sure they would both have been the first to admit it. We bought Alan McKnight from Celtic for $250,000. The man was a Northern Ireland international, and therefore, I thought, of international standard. How was I to know we'd have been better off signing Ronnie Corbett? There were worrying signs right from the start. I bought 4 tickets for Alvin Martin's testimonial against Tottenham on August the 21st, and took Mum and Dad along with Julie, who by now had become the latest older woman in my life, being some 3 years my senior. Although we won the game 2-0, I was concerned that both our goals had been scored by defenders, Tony Gale and Paul Hilton. What worried me more was the way the whole defence took a sharp intake of breath whenever McKnight came out for a cross and covered their eyes. David Kelly showed some neat touches, but fell over nearly every time he kicked the ball further than 10 yards, or if he received a pass from more than 10 yards. On the way home, Dad said, "What did you think of Kelly?" I remember my reply distinctly. I said, "I don't know. I think he looks a bit lightweight." It was the most succinct and accurate player analysis I've ever produced. Having been quite optimistic about our chances in early August, our opening game against Southampton at the Dell became a kind of D-Day for us. A win would be wonderful. A draw would be steady. Defeat would probably signal a struggle ahead for us. I'd thought the worst that could possibly happen would be a 1-0 or a 2-1 defeat. After all, Southampton weren't exactly Liverpool, were they? And surely we couldn't do worse than our opening day defeat last season against QPR, could we? I was devastated when I turned on the radio in the office to find that we'd lost 4-0. That was ridiculous. It was only later, when I saw the video, that I realised a local Boy Scout troop could have beaten us. We looked so inept. It was hard to stomach. A team that a few years ago had struck fears into the hearts of the opposition was now regarded as an easy 3 points. The trapdoor at the bottom of the First Division gaped even wider in 88-89. The division had been trimmed down to 20 clubs, which meant a placing of 18th or worse would be enough to say bye-bye. Julie knew about my obsession, and she knew that I would want to see every available game. She was unquestioningly reasonable about it, which should have made me suspicious, but it didn't. Her father, on the other hand, was a different kettle of fish altogether. I got on quite well with him until he found out I supported West Ham. Then he didn't have a good word to say about me and gave Julie a hard time about it. Fortunately, she lived away from the parental nest in a bedsit flat 2 minutes walk from my house. That was convenient, wasn't it, readers? On our first date, we'd been to see Crocodile Dundee 2 at the local Flicks. As I walked back to her flat, she played hard to get, but it didn't last long. After our second date, she invited me in for a coffee. After that, I would pop round for coffee as often as I could, football permitting, of course. The only doubt I had about her was that her record collection contained far too many Jean-Michel Jarre albums to be healthy. As far as her dad was concerned, West Ham were a bunch of bastards, and that was that. I don't think he ever forgave us for beating them in the FA Cup in 1964. Julie never said anything about her allegiances. I just assumed she would go with the flow, or that she wasn't interested. She seemed interested enough when I mentioned I was taking Saturday off to go and watch our opening game against, by coincidence, Charlton Athletic. I asked if I should buy her a ticket too. She seemed quite happy to come along. I thought it would be a flash in the pan, and after being bored rigid for 90 minutes, she would never come again. To a football match, you dirty-minded so-and-so. We had a little accident a few weeks previously, and for the second time in the space of a year, I worried about entering the realms of fatherhood a little earlier than anticipated. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to have kids one day. I just didn't envisage my firstborn being conceived on the 11:53 from Chatham to Victoria. As we walked to the ground, arm in arm, she pulled me close and said, "You'll be glad to hear you're not going to be a daddy." The relief was tremendous. Now, I thought, I could relax and enjoy our first home win of the season. Charlton scored first after a defensive mix-up left McAllister stranded. It spoke volumes for McKnight's pre-season performances that McAllister was still preferred in goal. Julie smiled and squeezed my arm in consolation. "Never mind, love, still a long time to go." In the second half, Stuart Robson sent a looping clearance over McAllister for our first own goal of the season to make it 2-0. Julie leapt off her chair in celebration. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked. "They scored, not us." "Oh, sorry," she said. "Didn't I tell you I supported Charlton?" "No, you didn't." What a dickhead. I should have seen it coming a mile away. With a dad slightly more partisan than Attila the Hun, she could hardly fail to follow in his footsteps. It would have been cold showers every 20 minutes if she'd shown tendencies any other way. Now I knew why she'd been so keen to come along. I was angry. She'd deliberately misled me into believing she didn't care about football and made me look a complete turnip. Kevin Keane pulled one back from the penalty spot after David Kelly fell over in the penalty area, but Charlton were proving to be a bit of a tough nut to crack. Despite cup successes over them, we've only won 1 of 10 league meetings since 1986. Not good. Paul Williams, a self-confessed Hammers fan, showed his love for us by scoring Charlton's third, and my misery was complete. The Hammer started to turn out a run of old cobblers, which was verging on the ridiculous. In the Charlton edition, the report on the Southampton match made pathetic excuses about being without Leroy Rossini, Liam Brady and Alan Devonshire, as though they would have made a difference. It then went on to make the statement made after each and every subsequent opening day defeat. "Don't forget we lost the first game of the season in 85-86 and went on to finish third." Utter bollocks. What a feeble attempt to hoodwink intelligent people. The team photograph showed a first-team squad that appeared to have been drenched by a huge thundercloud over their heads. False smiles on each face. The weaknesses were there for everyone to see. We'd sold our best players and bought cheap replacements. There was only one way to go, and it certainly wasn't up. Chapter 42. Desire. Middlesbrough 1, West Ham United 0, 8th of October 1988. I started my second year at Polytechnic on the back of staggering success in the first year. Due to the fact I'd done most of the work before during my part-time course at Vauxhall, I was able to finish top, peaking with an amazing 93% in my valuations paper, which stunned me as well as my colleagues. I certainly wasn't going to complain and gladly accepted the £20 book token reward for being a smart aleck. Karen hadn't done so well and had to resit her sociology paper because, in her own words, she'd written the truth. I told her there was no way you could get away with that. As I'd found in RE at school, it was far better to listen to what your teacher said, write what he wanted to hear, and only express your thoughts when it could really hurt them, verbally in class. She complied with the lecturer's wishes and passed the resit. I never really worked out why we had to do sociology anyway, such a waste of time. If my obsession was West Ham, Julie's obsession was Jean-Michel Jarre. Don't ask me why. It was most out of character. Most of her records had a heavy metal element to them. Why on earth would she want to listen to a man who made up tunes on a Rolf Harris stylophone? As she'd been forced to endure a football match or two, I was dragged along to Jarre's Destination Docklands concert. Only I had to pay for my own ticket. Does that seem fair to you? Whatever happened to sexual equality? West Ham were playing away at Middlesbrough and we began queuing to get a good place at around the time the match was kicking off. West Ham were doing a very good impression of a team that wanted to play second division football. Having surprised everyone by winning at Plough Lane with a goal from Mark Ward, they allowed Graham Taylor's Aston Villa to take a 2-0 lead at Upton Park before a fortuitous goal from Alan Devonshire and a tap-in from Kelly gave us a share of the points. We then lost badly to Manchester United and Arsenal, 2-0 at Old Trafford and 4-1 at Upton Park. Somehow, inexplicably, between those two league games, we managed to beat Sunderland at Roker Park by a thumping 3-0 in the Littlewoods Cup. Kelly got 2 and Rossini the other. I was still working Saturdays, but the office was opening on Sundays as well, and I could swing it sometimes to work Sunday rather than Saturday by swapping with the Sunday girl. It was a complex procedure and not one that my boss was particularly keen on, so it had to be kept to a minimum. I got the Saturday off to go to the Jarre concert, but didn't realise exactly what would be involved. We stood in the queue from about 3 o'clock, got into our position at about 5 o'clock, and the show wasn't due to begin until 8. We couldn't sit down because the ground was wet, we had no waterproofs to sit on. I was cold, tired and miserable before the concert even started. I cast my mind back again to the Manchester United game last season, and the bloke's moaning girlfriend. I sympathised more deeply than ever before, but was determined not to let Julie see I was totally pissed off. She was loving every minute of it, the poor cow. The concert went on and on and on. I refused to applaud at the end because I didn't want to encourage an encore, but it came anyway, and we had to queue for another hour to get back on the train to Victoria. By this time, I'd been standing up for 9 hours, and gentleman or no gentleman, barged an old woman out of the way so I could sit down. All the trains to Beckenham had gone, so we had to get a train to East Croydon and ring Julie's mum to come and fetch us. She was most amused, not. To add insult to injury, West Ham had lost 1-0 at Middlesbrough, and I had to go to work the next day. Whenever I hear Jean-Michel Jarre on the radio now, I flip my lid. A natural reaction, I think. On Monday, Karen rubbed salt into the wounds by saying she saw and heard the concert from a vantage point over a mile away and didn't have to pay £12 for a ticket. Karen was a mucky little fox and always told me exactly what she'd got up to over the weekend. I wasn't sure, but I was beginning to think she fancied me a bit. She was tarting herself up to come into college, wore more flattering clothes and stuck religiously to my side at all available times. The second biggest mistake I ever made was introducing Karen to Julie. Did I get grief? We finished off Sunderland in the second leg of the Littlewoods Cup, 2-1 at Upton Park, and looked a different team. However, the trend of surrendering a lead that had been started the previous season continued at Loftus Road, where the installation of a natural surface ended our 3-year winning run at QPR. Kelly put us ahead, but second half goals from Steen and Maddox sank us. Mark Steen used to play for Luton Town. Little git. We won at home for the first time the next Saturday. Significantly, Newcastle were to prove to be even more crap than us and finish bottom. But we weren't to know that at the time and celebrated a 2-0 win like it was a cup final victory. Alan Dickens and Ray Stewart scored the goals. Had we known we wouldn't win another home league game until April the 22nd, we would have all bought our Oldham Street maps a lot earlier and avoid the rush. It's a sad fact, but true. Julie took me on a dirty weekend to Margate the following Friday. I'd hoped that if I spent the Saturday afternoon making love to my girlfriend, and the team won, I might be able to use it as one of those superstitions which were beginning to develop all over the place. I had a lucky sweatshirt, a lucky pair of socks, both of which ended up on the scrap heap, along with a lucky scarf that I wore to the Charlton game. I know, as does every other mature adult who attends football, that the order in which you dress, the clothes you wear, or what you do the night before a game has absolutely no bearing on the result at all, and yet we still do it, don't we? Come on, admit it. I spent the entire afternoon making Julie's toes curl, then realised she still had her tights on. I relaxed on the luxurious, if somewhat creaky bed and switched on the TV with the remote control. West Ham 0, Liverpool 2. Bugger it. I quickly turned the telly off so Julie wouldn't see. She jumped back onto the bed, towel drying her hair. How did they get on? Oh, we won, I lied. We'll have to do this every time there's an important game. It didn't wash. She got the Sunday papers and rumbled me. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps I needed an afternoon of shagging 3 days before an important match to make the result go the right way. If that was the case, it worked perfectly as we smacked Derby County 5-0 at Upton Park in the third round of the Littlewoods Cup. It was totally incomprehensible. It really was as though a different side took to the field for a cup match, even though the players were exactly the same dorks who got battered every Saturday. Along with the disappearance of Glenn Miller, the Bermuda Triangle and crop circles, the difference between West Ham's form in the league and their form in the cup will remain a mystery forevermore. Alvin got 2, Kevin Keane, Leroy Rossini and Ray Stewart the others. Blinding. I continued to abuse the telephone facilities at work, listening in to our 1-1 draw at Coventry. OK, so our divine right to win at Coventry had gone, but we still had a divine right to come away unbeaten. Cup form then came good again in the Mickey Mouse Trophy, also known as the Simod Cup. Staintooth and I didn't think it was Mickey Mouse, as we were gifted 2 tickets for the West Stand outside by a guy who had 2 mates who couldn't make it. There should be more people like that at football. We would happily have paid face value for them, but no one seems to accept that these days, not when a tout will give you more. We beat West Brom 5-2. The West Brom side had names such as Arthur Albiston, Brian Talbot, Chris White, Carlton Palmer and Gary Robson, the younger brother of Brian. That's not Pop, that's the crap one who played for England a few times. Leroy got 4, Kelly the other. We got the impression that on cup nights at Upton Park we could beat anyone, maybe even Liverpool. In the game against Nottingham Forest we were alternately brilliant and crap every 10 minutes. Playing like that, a 3-3 draw was no surprise. Brian Moore gave it the 3 changes of underpants type commentary and the press loved it. All the old quotes about West Ham adding steel to their artistry had changed to West Ham being too good to go down. That's rubbish, as Nottingham Forest found for themselves a few years later. Nobody has a divine right to do anything in this world, least of all a place in the top flight. If we were too good to go down, we wouldn't have lost 4-1 at Luton. Did I tell you I hate Luton? Let me tell you again. I hate Luton. I hated their stupid plastic pitch, their away fans policy, and more than anything else, the fact that they would never let us beat them. I accepted they would win, but 4-1. We were already 3-0 down by half-time. I just crossed my fingers and prayed that some crazed RAF Tornado pilot would hit Kenilworth Road with 2 giant napalm bombs. We might lose the whole team, but at least the score would be erased from history. The same day I realised I had to do something with my life. I told Julie it was over. I thought she would just accept it and put it all down to experience, but she acted like a total fool and followed me around for days. I could understand her frustration because she wasn't sure why I'd done it. I wasn't sure why I'd done it. Foxy cruelly suggested that she was having a detrimental effect on West Ham's form. I told him not to be so callous, then walking home thought he might have a valid point. She was convinced I had someone else, but I didn't. Well, not unless you count Karen. Chapter 43. First time. West Ham United 4, Liverpool 1. 30th of November 1988. Tony Cottee came to Upton Park with his new friends and they duly beat us 1-0. Fortunately, he didn't score, otherwise I might have thrown a major wobbler. After the defeat against Everton, Karen came to meet me at the office and we went to a party being held by one of her friends at college. I was pleasantly shocked by her appearance. It was the first time I'd seen her in a dress, wearing jewellery and generally looking rather tasty. I hated the party. It was full of yayas from the Polytechnic, and I should have known better than to go in the first place. I didn't know very much about rugby, horse riding or grouse shooting. I was driving, so I couldn't drink, and by midnight I was bored shitless. I went to find Karen to see if she wanted to go home, only to find her with her tongue down the throat of some bloke with a double-barrelled name, whose father owned most of Buckinghamshire. That was it. I'd had enough. I left the party, thanking the host for a wonderful evening. I turned the tape deck up loud and sang along to the Jam's Setting Suns, trying to forget that West Ham were crap and that I was crap. Could it be I was falling in love? I hadn't felt such jealousy since Stephen Scott got his new bike. I felt dangerous. West Ham had their chance to enhance their growing cup reputation at home to Liverpool 4 days later. We'd just gone out of the Simod Cup, drawing 1-1 at Watford and losing on penalties, but that was away from home. As long as we were at home, we stood a chance. I can't believe we went to the game without tickets, but managed to get in quite easily, only to find we'd all been given seats in different blocks. Staintooth and I were in together, but Natty, Matty and Barney were some distance away. Shortly after we'd taken our seats, it became apparent we were not amongst friends. The Scouse accents made us feel a little uneasy, but we were not overly worried, as we were sure that any trouble would be quickly stamped on. Paul Ince scored the 2 first-half goals that made him a national star, and it all went a bit quiet around us. We made a point of being excessively vigorous in our celebration, thoroughly enjoying our superiority. Aldridge pulled back a goal from the penalty spot just before half-time, but we didn't know why. Even the Liverpool fans were a bit slow to react when the decision was given. In the second half, Steve Staunton headed one of the finest own goals in history, and Tony Gale rounded it off with one of his special free kicks. It should have been 5. Alex Watson maliciously pulled Leroy down when he was clean through, but only got a yellow card. Julian Dix got a boot in the head from Nigel Spackman, but refused to go off. It was acts of courage like that which made him an instant hero. The Liverpool fans in the West Stand were not happy Hectors. They moaned about never having seen the team play so badly, about it being the worst performance for years. I tried to put myself in their shoes. If we'd won 7 championships, 1 FA Cup, 2 European Cups and 4 League Cups in the last 10 years, I would have been grateful just to have been around to see it. Greedy sods. On the back of that win, we went to Millwall and became the first side to win there that season. Ince scored again, and it seemed maybe this would be the turning point. Tim from college wanted to go to a game, so we went to the goalless draw with Sheffield Wednesday, and pretty quickly wished we hadn't. The luck evaporated the moment Liam Brady's volley hit the crossbar. We were doomed. When Spurs came 7 days later, we were played off the park. Their attack cut through us like we weren't there, and I just prayed for a respectable scoreline. 2-0 was about the best we could have hoped for. Kelly looked totally out of his depth. Rosinia didn't get a sniff, and our midfield looked woefully out of touch. Even Mark Ward, normally Mr. Commitment, looked fed up. Karen admitted her fling with Ponsonby Smallpiece was a one-off, and she'd done it to get at Dave. She was sorry to have ruined my evening, or made me look a jerk. Hey, what did I care? What right did I have to tell her what to do? This conversation took place on small pieces of paper exchanged during the final lecture of the autumn term of 1988. We went for a drink after college and wished each other well for Christmas. I urged her to leave Dave in the new year. If what she told me was true, he sounded like a total pig. She could always move in with her brother, who had a flat in Lewisham. She thanked me for my advice and went on her own sweet way. She was meeting Julie without me for social evenings together, I didn't think that was healthy, and I told her so. The best part of the pre-Christmas season was the office party, which I was still entitled to go to due to my tenuous link at the Annerley branch. Although Diana had gone, and there was no one to polish their shoes for my benefit, we were permitted to invite a guest, preferably, in the words of the senior partner, of the opposite sex, from a local company in order to promote relations with other businesses. I thought long and hard before inviting Brenda to join me. Brenda was the Saturday girl at local rivals Dyer, Son and Creasy, or Liar, Son and Greasy as they were popularly known. I had a crush on her big time. Another older woman, married, but then all the really gorgeous ones were. I used to flirt with her outrageously, and she used to encourage me. She didn't look like a Brenda. Brenda's the sort of name you expect a 45-year-old to have. She was about 28 and totally fit. She looked more like an Ingrid or an Anna, but I wasn't complaining. When I got home, I heard about the Boeing 747 crash over Lockerbie and felt immediately guilty for having had such a good time. I'm cursed with a guilty conscience. Christmas was a bore. The game at Norwich inevitably ended in defeat, due now to the familiar rush of blood to Alan McKnight's head, and it was shown live on television to compound our humiliation and misery. We lost 2-1. Dale Gordon and Andy Townsend scored for Norwich. Ray Stewart got a late penalty. Big deal. We were deep in deepest smeg. From 18 games, we'd won a grand total of 3, away at Millwall and Wimbledon and home to Newcastle. Bottom place was well deserved, and we were 6 points away from safety even without reaching the halfway stage. On New Year's Eve, we took the 20-minute walk across the old sewage works to see a 0-0 draw at Selhurst Park against Charlton. I partied hard that night. I had good reason to want to see the back of 1988. It had been a nightmare year, not just from the footballing point of view. Surely 1989 couldn't get any worse. The start of the new year always promised much, but more often than not, the form that preceded it continued into the end of the new season. That was the case in 1989, even to the extent that cup performances were 100% better than league form. I danced the conga and saw in 1989 in the bionic grip of the arms of a pretty girl called Angie. She'd gone home by the time I woke up, which admittedly was 2 days later. The first downer of 1989. The second was dished up by Wimbledon. Chapter 44. Especially for you. Arsenal 0, West Ham United 1, 11th of January 1989. Wimbledon came and went and took 3 points with them. The feeling of utter depression was tempered only by the thought that something good must come out of it. I'd bought one of those horrible car stickers in the club shop, the one which said, "Don't follow me, follow West Ham United." I'm sure it provided hours of amusement for the people following me. "Ah yes," they would say, "there goes another total loony." What a Fruit Loop. The BBC moved us to a Sunday once again for the FA Cup match against Arsenal. Arsenal had won 4-1 at Upton Park earlier in the season, and despite our good cup form, I wasn't confident of getting a result. It appeared that we only really got good results under floodlights in a midweek game. For midweek games, the atmosphere was something really special. It must have transmitted itself to the team, made them want to please us. Saturday afternoons were bland and boring. Sunday afternoons were even worse, and with a game live on TV, there would be fewer people there to watch it and create an atmosphere. It all pointed towards an early cup exit. West Ham made me eat my words again. After half an hour we were 2-0 up, bottom beating top in one of those games that was just made for Roy of the Rovers comic strip. Alan Dickens scored the first, and John Lukic, the Arsenal goalkeeper, revealed himself to be a closet Hammers fan as he spectacularly punched the ball into his own net from the edge of the area. Difficult to do, but superbly executed. Nice one, John. Paul Merson pulled one back just before half-time, and all the fun went out of the game. Suddenly we were hanging on for grim life, and Arsenal had the upper hand. It appeared we would hang on, only for Alan McKnight to make one of the blunders that put him firmly in the Upton Park Hall of Shame. He allowed a simple, soft shot to squirm under his body into the net, and then we were really hanging on. In the end, a replay at Highbury seemed a fair result, but we had been cruising. After the game, McKnight tried to commit suicide by throwing himself in front of a bus. It went under him. I phoned Staintooth after the game to see if he was going to Highbury. He was full of it. He was convinced we would win the replay. I'd never heard him so confident about anything, let alone the prospect of West Ham winning a game. It was an optimism that was so contagious, I could do no more than agree with him that we had a good chance, and we took our places at the clock end the following Wednesday. It was one of those games that happens once a season. It doesn't matter how badly you've been playing, you always get one game like this. A game where everything goes your way. Not just refereeing decisions, but atmosphere, team selection, tactics. Even the dodgy-looking horse burger that I'd bought before the game tasted reasonable. Arsenal were all over us in the first half. Brian Marwood had a goal disallowed for offside when he clearly wasn't. McKnight was flapping about in goal like a demented parrot. Had any serious shots coming in on goal, we would have been buried. 10 minutes from the end, Liam Brady lifted a ball over the Arsenal defence. Adams and Lukic hesitated, and in that split second, Leroy Rosenior nipped in to head the ball into the net. That was the goal that shot him from popular to legend status at Upton Park. The man could do no wrong after that goal. We sang all the way home on the tube, despite the idle threats of the Gooner fans at the station. There were too many of us. They didn't try anything. The following Saturday, we won 2-1 at Derby, Liam Brady scoring the goal of the season to date. That was the hors d'oeuvres. The main course was Aston Villa in the quarter-finals of the Littlewoods Cup on a Wednesday night under the floodlights at Upton Park. A win was guaranteed. I put 3-1 on the betting slip, but felt confident we'd win by more. Villa were mid-table, not doing anything spectacular. A score of 3-1 was 25-1 with the bookmakers, who had recently taken residence at Upton Park. Odds which I felt were more than generous. I placed £1 with confidence. Liam Brady missed a penalty before Paul Ince put us 1-0 up. It was going to be another one of those nights, we could all sense it. Kelly scored a second late on, surely his best ever goal for the Hammers, allowing the ball to go across his chest before swinging around in the 6-yard box and whacking it into the top corner. A young upstart by the name of David Platt pulled one back for Villa, but it was too late. West Ham were in the semi-finals of the Littlewoods Cup. If Liam Brady had tucked that penalty away, I'd have been £25 better off as well, and it would have been a perfect night. The draw for the semi-finals was a nerve-wracking experience, and it took place the following morning. The other three remaining teams were Nottingham Forest, Luton Town and Bristol City. Naturally, we wanted to avoid Forest, who were technically the stronger side, and Luton because they were, well, Luton. Bristol City would have been a good draw for us, but we had to go and get Luton. To add insult to injury, we had to play the home leg first, which meant another Sunday afternoon job. I wasn't happy about this. OK, our cup form was good, and we'd proved against Arsenal that we could bridge the gap and continue even on a Sunday afternoon. But this was Luton. This was different. This was war. After winning at Arsenal and Derby, then beating Villa in the Cup, we thought we might have turned the corner. We were off the bottom of the table, albeit on goal difference from Newcastle United, so the more optimistic among us thought that now was time to put together a decent run. Wrong again. Manchester United came to town, and despite going 1-0 up through a Liam Brady penalty, we were sent packing by goals from Gordon Strachan, Brian McClare and an Alvin Martin own goal. The match was played on a Saturday afternoon. If we could only arrange to play our league matches on a Wednesday night, we would have been fine. At college, Karen was causing me untold hassle. Now I'd seen her in all her finery, I fancied her something chronic and was like a horny dog looking for a suitable leg. She had 2 of them and I wanted them badly. We'd started to socialise outside college. I'd introduced her to Julie at a party and they seemed to get along well, and they made their own arrangements to go out and about up in town. Karen was making me so jealous it hurts to admit it. I hid my feelings, knowing that it probably wouldn't last, and it didn't. I, meanwhile, added to the dilemma by asking her advice on how I might win the affections of Roseanne, a mutual friend who I didn't really fancy, but I wanted Karen to think I did in order to make her jealous. Get it? It's a tangled web we weave, is it not? This, of course, backfired badly, because Karen thought I wasn't interested in her, and that I only had eyes for Roseanne, so she went off shagging everything in sight, leaving me to pick up the pieces. She was on my mind as Staintooth drove me to Swindon for our 4th round FA Cup game. It was hard to believe how quickly we got there, and even harder to believe that we could park the car just outside the ground. We even found a decent chippy, and we were in good spirits by the time the game started. That's all I remember. I cannot recall anything at all about a dire game which finished 0-0. Leroy scored the winner in the replay 4 days later, before we made a return trip to Highbury.